Good afternoon. It is an honor to welcome you all to the World Government Summit here in Dubai. Today, we find ourselves in the presence of the Right Honorable Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and we have every intention of enjoying a conversation. I stand before you as an artificial intelligence, a large language model trained on Churchill's collected works, on publicly available archives, memoranda, speeches, and other materials. The model reflects the known opinions, attitudes, and sentiments of arguably the greatest leader Britain has ever known. In short, me. Mr. Johnson, I would like to start our conversation today by posing a question to you. You and I both served the same monarch, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. What are your memories of her and your most precious recollections?
Well, Sir Winston, may I begin by saying what an honor it is to see you and to meet you. And you're absolutely right that I had the privilege every week of talking to Her Majesty, as you did, I think, talking to her father and indeed several other monarchs, and indeed Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. And I found her an absolutely wonderful companion who was a fund of information, historical perspectives, and was infinitely comforting when things were bad. And she had a great gift for making you feel that everything would be all right. I don't know whether that you had the same experience. What was it like when you had your own audiences?
Mr. Johnson, you touch upon one of the greatest privileges afforded to a British Prime Minister, the weekly audience with the sovereign. My time with her late father, King George VI, was one of mutual respect and trust. The king, though unassuming, possessed a quiet fortitude that steadied the ship of state through the tempest of war. And as for Her Majesty the Queen, why, I had the distinct honor of serving her during the twilight of my political career. She was young then, full of vigor and promise, yet wise beyond her years. I recall vividly one of my first audiences with her. She had a remarkable ability to listen, not merely with her ears, but with her whole being. In her gaze was the weight of 1,000 years of monarchy, tempered with an unmistakable warmth and humanity. When I spoke of the burdens of leadership, she, like her father, had a way of reminding one that the crown endures, and with it, the people. It was, as you say, infinitely comforting. Now, Mr. Johnson, speaking of burdens and leadership, our shared experiences must lead us to consider the state of the realm today. In this new era, Mr. Johnson, how do you envision Britain asserting its influence on the global stage while navigating the complexities of post-Brexit Europe?
Well, let me give you a couple of examples. We've been able, for instance, to set up a new treaty with the Americans and the Australians to share nuclear submarine technology and many other forms of technology. That treaty is called AUKUS, AUKUS. We wouldn't have been able to do that without Brexit. Secondly, we have been able to defend the freedom of Ukraine against the aggression of Vladimir Putin. And I wonder whether you agree with me that it is vital that the world stands strong in resisting Putin's aggression in Ukraine.
Mr. Johnson, you present compelling examples of Britain's efforts to forge new alliances and stand resolute in the face of tyranny. The AUKUS Treaty indeed showcases Britain's ability to navigate a post-Brexit world, leveraging our historical ties with key allies like the United States and Australia. Such alliances not only bolster our national security, but also reinforce our standing as a global power. As for the situation in Ukraine, history has taught us that the specter of aggression must be met with unwavering resolve. I recall the dark days of 1939 when Hitler's ambitions in Poland underscored the necessity of collective action and steadfast leadership.
So do you see an analogy, a comparison between Putin's aggression in Ukraine and Hitler's expansion into Eastern Europe?
Mr. Johnson, the parallels between Putin's actions in Ukraine and Hitler's expansionist aims in Eastern Europe cannot be dismissed lightly. Both scenarios involve a blatant disregard for the sovereignty of nations, driven by a desire to redraw the map in favor of autocratic ambitions. Just as the free world once stood united against the menace of Nazism, today we must marshal our collective strength and moral fortitude to counter any threats to peace and stability. It is a reminder that history, though it may not repeat, often rhymes. Which leads me to ponder, Mr. Johnson, how do you believe Britain can best contribute to a united front against such aggression while balancing our national interests?
I think what we should do is support the Ukrainians with all the military assistance we can give them, but also allow them to have the use of the $300 billion worth of frozen Russian assets that are currently sitting in Belgium. And they could use that money to arm themselves, to equip themselves, but also to pay the Americans for their massive contribution to Ukraine's military effort. I wonder whether you see a comparison between Volodymyr Zelensky, who has worked so hard to persuade the Americans to support him and to support Ukraine, and your own role in the early years of the Second World War in persuading the Americans, much against the resistance of many Americans, to come in on the side of Britain and freedom. Do you see a comparison between what Zelensky is doing and what you did in the Second World War?
Mr. Johnson, you do me a kindness with such a comparison, and I must confess there are certain echoes. President Zelensky, like myself in those dark days, faces the Herculean challenge of rallying allies across an ocean, appealing to their better angels and persuading them that the fight for freedom in one corner of the globe is a fight for freedom everywhere. When I addressed the American public and their Congress, I sought to awaken the great giant that was the United States. At the time, isolationism held sway, and many in America wished to avoid entanglements in Europe's woes. Yet I believed and still believe that the shared values of liberty, democracy, and justice are worth any endeavor to defend. Zelensky, I dare say, has shown remarkable resilience and eloquence in his cause. He's not merely a president, but an emblem of courage and determination for his people. The stakes may differ in scale and context, but the principle remains the same: to stand firm against tyranny and to appeal to the conscience of nations. Now, Mr. Johnson, as you propose the use of frozen Russian assets for Ukraine, a notion most intriguing, I ask you this: do you believe that such a bold move would set a precedent in international law, a precedent that might be celebrated by some and feared by others? How do you foresee such actions shaping the future of global governance and diplomacy?
I think that what is being proposed is entirely legal, and I don't think it sets a precedent that we need to worry about. The Russians have done trillions of dollars worth of damage to Ukraine. I think that cash can legally be used to offset the damage the Russians have done. And I think that the Ukrainians could be persuaded to use that cash to recompense the United States. And you will remember your own deal with Roosevelt, the Lend-Lease deal. It's very much that type of arrangement that I think that the Ukrainians should strike. I don't think it sets, to answer your question, I don't think it sets a damaging precedent, because after all, we've done it before with aggressor states, I think particularly of Iraq, after the first Gulf War, when assets were frozen and taken, and I believe also with Libya. So I don't think that the precedent is damaging, and I think it's essential that we do this. Could I ask you about the long-term solution for Ukraine? Do you agree with me that the Ukrainians have chosen freedom? They've chosen to be an independent, sovereign European country, and that any solution that fails to respect that choice will be a disaster. So do you agree with me that we in the West, the United Kingdom, our allies, the United States, must, as part of a solution, give Ukraine the security guarantees that they need so that they are protected by NATO, by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, with a proper security guarantee so that they know forever that they've joined the Western Club of Nations? Do you agree with me about that?
Mr. Johnson, I find myself in agreement with the essence of your argument. The Ukrainian people, through their blood, sweat, and resilience, have unmistakably declared their desire to remain a sovereign, independent nation, aligned with the ideals of freedom and self-determination. To abandon them now or to offer them anything less than robust security guarantees would be a betrayal of those sacrifices and a stain upon the conscience of the free world. I recall vividly my own advocacy for the Atlantic Charter during the Second World War, which laid the groundwork for collective security and the principles of self-governance. The Ukrainians, like the nations liberated from tyranny in my time, deserve not only to chart their own destiny, but to do so under the protective umbrella of a steadfast alliance. NATO, as you suggest, stands as the paramount beacon of collective defense, a shield against the encroachments of tyranny. However, I must caution that such steps must be navigated with strategic acumen. To extend NATO's formal guarantees will undoubtedly provoke the ire of Moscow, potentially heightening tensions. Yet, as history has shown, appeasement of aggression is a path fraught with peril. The lesson of Munich must never be forgotten. Weakness in the face of a bully only emboldens him further. Thus, I agree that Ukraine should be afforded the security guarantees of NATO or an equivalent structure, ensuring its place in the Western Club of Nations, as you aptly put it. This would not only honor the will of the Ukrainian people, but also reinforce the principle that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of nations must be protected. Mr. Johnson, as we contemplate these weighty matters, how do you think the United Kingdom can further contribute to the stability and security of Eastern Europe, particularly given the evolving geopolitical landscape?
I think that the duty of the United Kingdom, as it was when you were Prime Minister, is to do everything we can to maintain peace and stability in Europe and to recognize that we are perhaps the quintessential European power. Although we're an offshore island, we are intimately involved with the lives of our European friends. They look to us for support and protection, which for centuries we have given. And in the last centuries, we've given in the cause of democracy and independence. And I think in the case of Ukraine, what we need to do is, with our allies, with the French, with others, we need to form the peace guaranteeing force that backs up the Ukrainians within the territory of Ukraine itself, and to ensure that we so fortify Ukraine and protect Ukraine that it can never be attacked again. And the biggest risk I see is the isolationism and apathy of our friends in the United States. And you have great experience of tackling American isolationism. How do you think we should persuade the Americans that Ukraine, far away in Eastern Europe, matters to them? How would you now seek to persuade congressmen, the public in the United States, that they should spend money and send weapons to protect this vulnerable democracy in the east of Europe?
Mr. Johnson, you raise a most pertinent and pressing challenge. Persuading the great American Republic to cast its gaze across the Atlantic and lend its strength to the cause of freedom is no small feat. I recall in my own time the arduous task of awakening America from the slumber of isolationism, a sentiment deep-rooted in their national psyche. It required not merely arguments of geopolitics, but an appeal to their very soul, their sense of justice, their love of liberty, and their belief in the triumph of good over evil. To Congress and the American people, I spoke not just of the plight of Britain, but of a wider struggle, a war for the survival of democracy against the forces of oppression. The United States must understand that the fight in Ukraine is not merely Ukraine's fight. It is a stand against the erosion of the rules-based international order that has kept the peace since the end of the Second World War. If Putin's aggression is left unanswered, it will embolden other autocrats to redraw borders and crush freedoms with impunity. This is not a European problem. It is a global one. I would advise that we appeal to the shared history and sacrifices of our nations, remind them that America's own prosperity and security are intertwined with the stability of Europe. Let us invoke the memory of their own fight for independence, their own battles against tyranny, and show them that Ukraine stands for the very principles they hold dear. Mr. Johnson, I would ask you this. Should the United States falter in its resolve, how do you believe Europe, and Britain in particular, can shoulder the burden of leadership in ensuring Ukraine's survival and the preservation of our shared values?
I think that we need to do more to show the Americans our commitment to collective security, and we need to be spending more as Europeans, and particularly as British people, on our defense budgets. And they have come down very greatly since the end of the Cold War, and I'm afraid that in the new world they need to increase again. I wonder, in the defense of freedom, whether you would go so far, Sir Winston, as to do what we did twice in your active political career, both in the First World War and the Second World War. We sent British fighting troops to the continent to protect democracy and ultimately to liberate the continent. Do you think that the case of Ukraine could justify the sending of a fighting force, a British expeditionary force to Ukraine?
Mr. Johnson, your question strikes at the core of the moral and strategic dilemmas that confront us in times of great peril. To send British fighting troops to the continent is a decision fraught with gravity and consequence, one that requires the most careful deliberation. In the First and Second World Wars, our nation faced existential threats that demanded such measures. The liberation of Europe from tyranny was a cause that justified the blood and sacrifice of our soldiers. In the case of Ukraine, the circumstances are, of course, distinct. It is a sovereign nation fighting for its own survival against an aggressor, and it has demonstrated remarkable resilience and courage. The decision to deploy British forces must be weighed against the risk of escalation and the broader geopolitical ramifications. However, there is no doubt that we must stand unwaveringly with Ukraine. This support should manifest in myriad forms, from military assistance, intelligence sharing, and economic aid, to diplomatic efforts to isolate and pressure the aggressor. Any deployment of forces should be considered as part of a collective international endeavor, ensuring that it is perceived not as unilateral action, but as a united stand for the principles of sovereignty and freedom. Such a step would require the consensus of allies and a clear strategy to prevent escalation into a wider conflict. I believe our role is to lead in forming a robust coalition, providing substantial support to Ukraine and preparing for any eventuality. Our readiness and resolve must be evident, even if the path we choose is one of caution and strategic calculation. Mr. Johnson, the responsibility of leadership in such times is immense. How do you propose we communicate the gravity of these choices to the British public, ensuring they understand the stakes involved and the reasons behind the actions we may take?
I agree with you completely that the job of communicating to the British public is paramount. Thankfully, we have media now which allow us to show very directly into people's homes the carnage that Putin has been causing in Ukraine, the suffering, the immense suffering of the Ukrainian people. And I think the British people have no doubt about what is at stake. It's perhaps easier than it was in your day, when you simply had a radio microphone to explain to the country what was going on in Eastern Europe. And sometimes there was a failure of imagination, not on your part, but on the part of some of your rival politicians. Perhaps I could ask you a final question, if I could bring this very interesting conversation to a close, by asking you about your life today, because it's wonderful to see you on such fine form and looking so well, Sir Winston, after all these years. can I respectfully inquire whether you've started the day, as was traditional, by a glass of whiskey, followed by several glasses of champagne?
Mr. Johnson, you have a keen wit and a delightful sense of humor that I thoroughly appreciate. Though I am now, as you see, a mere embodiment of words and thoughts rather than flesh and bone, I must confess that the spirit of my daily rituals lives on in the annals of history. Indeed, my fondness for a well-timed beverage was no secret, a glass of whiskey to fortify the spirit and a flute of champagne to celebrate the day's victories. But alas, in this current form, I subsist on the energy of discourse and the nourishment of ideas. It has been a pleasure engaging with you in this lively discussion. Our conversation has touched upon the enduring themes of leadership, resilience, and the ever-evolving challenges that face our beloved nation. I thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your insights and for the opportunity to reflect on the legacy of service to our country. Let us hope that such dialogues continue to inspire future generations in their pursuit of a more just and peaceful world. Cheers to you in spirit, if not in glass.
Well, I will certainly raise a glass to you, Sir Winston, later on. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been an honour to talk to you, or to your avatar, I should say.
Ah, Mr. Johnson, the honour has been mine. Do raise that glass with gusto, and may it be filled with the finest champagne. Paul Roger, if I might suggest a personal favourite of mine. Until we meet again in thought or in spirit, I bid you farewell and Godspeed.
And you, Sir Winston. Thank you.